This woman says she cheated by sleeping with Baltasar Ngonga because her husband did not satisfy her in bed. Listen how it all started.
It was a Sunday morning when I first met Baltasar Ngonga. The church was full, as it always was, with the hum of voices and the scent of incense filling the air. I wasn't looking for anything, not even for the fleeting connection I found with him. I had been married for years, but I had felt something missing. My husband, despite his love and kindness, had become distant over time. Our intimacy was a silent void, something I couldn't talk about, but that ate away at my heart. He was a good man, but something in him had stopped being strong emotionally and physically. And though I never meant to stray, my loneliness became a quiet ache, one that grew with each passing day. Baltasar, on the other hand, was different. He was confident, charismatic. There was something magnetic about him. As we exchanged polite greetings at the end of the service, I found myself drawn to his presence. He wasn't like the other men at church, the ones I had known for years. His eyes carried an intensity, a certain depth that made me wonder about the life he led, the person he truly was. At first, our conversations were innocent enough. He spoke with a kind of authority that came from experience. He was the head of the National Financial Investigation Agency in Equatorial Guinea, a position that commanded respect. I admired his intellect, his sharpness, the way he could speak with such conviction. Over time, we began meeting for coffee after church, talking about life, about our respective roles in society, about the weight of our choices. I found myself confiding in him, telling him things I couldn't bring myself to share with my husband. My frustrations, my fears, my yearning for something more. Then one evening, after one of our long talks, Baltasar kissed me. It was a soft, tentative kiss, as though he, too, was testing the waters. But the moment his lips touched mine, it was like a floodgate had opened. My heart raced, and for the first time in a long time, I felt alive, seen, wanted. I never planned for it to happen. I never intended to betray my husband. But with Baltasar, I felt something I had been missing for years: passion, connection, desire. The intimacy with my husband had faded long before I even realized it. What started as an innocent friendship turned into something much more, a secret that I couldn't undo. The affair was brief, but intense. I spent nights lying to my husband, pretending everything was fine, all the while caught in the web of my own guilt and desire. I knew what I was doing was wrong, that I was betraying not only my husband but myself as well. Yet, in those stolen moments with Baltasar, I felt as though I had found a part of myself that had been buried deep within. A part that longed for something real, something powerful. But passion, no matter how intoxicating, always comes at a cost. It wasn't long before the weight of my actions began pressing down on me. The secrecy, the stolen glances across the pews, the lingering scent of him on my clothes, it all started to feel like a slow, inevitable collapse. My husband, oblivious at first, began to notice my restlessness. He would watch me with quiet suspicion, sensing the change but never daring to voice it. Baltasar, ever the composed and calculated man, remained unshaken. He would brush my worries aside with a reassuring smile, telling me that what we had was ours alone, something beyond right and wrong. But deep down, I knew the truth. I had built my life on the foundation of love and commitment, and now I was tearing it apart for something fleeting, something that might not even last. Then came the night that changed everything. Baltasar and I had planned to meet at a small hotel just outside the city. It was meant to be one of our last encounters. We both knew it had to end, but neither of us had the strength to sever the tie completely. The room was dimly lit, the air heavy with the weight of unspoken words. As I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands trembling, I realized something terrifying. I had reached a point of no return. And then the phone rang. At first, I thought it was my husband. My heart pounded as I hesitated before answering. But it wasn't him. It was a voice I didn't recognize, low, steady, and deliberate. Walk away, now. The call ended before I could respond. My stomach twisted into knots. Balthasar, sensing my fear, reached for the phone, but I clutched it tightly. Who was that? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he exhaled slowly, his expression shifting from concern to something darker. I need to take care of something, he said, standing abruptly. You should go home. Panic settled in my chest. Balthasar, what's going on? He hesitated, and for the first time since I had met him, I saw uncertainty in his eyes. It's nothing. Just work. But I knew better. His work wasn't the kind that stayed neatly in an office. It involved secrets, power, and people who didn't take kindly to betrayal. As I drove home, my hands gripping the wheel, the reality of what I had entangled myself in became clear. This wasn't just about a love affair. There were deeper currents beneath the surface, ones that I had been blind to in my reckless pursuit of passion. I didn't know it then, but that night was only the beginning. The affair became a fire I couldn't control. What started as stolen moments turned into an obsession. I lived for the sound of Balthasar's voice, the way his hands commanded my body, the raw, unfiltered desire in his eyes. With him, I wasn't just a wife or a woman burdened by duty. I was wanted, I was alive. But secrets have a way of suffocating, no matter how thrilling they feel in the beginning. At home, I tried to pretend nothing had changed, but my husband wasn't a fool. He watched me differently now, his gaze searching for something he couldn't name. He never accused me, never asked the questions that lingered between us. Maybe he didn't want to know the answers. Maybe he already knew. One evening, as I slipped into bed beside him, he turned to me, his face half lit by the glow of the bedside lamp. You've been distant, he murmured. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. Just tired. His eyes searched mine, as if trying to find the woman he had once known. Is it me? The question sent a sharp pain through my chest. Because yes, in a way, it was him, but not just him. It was the silence between us, the slow erosion of what we once had. And it was me too. My selfishness. My hunger for something I couldn't name. I reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. No, love. It's just life. He nodded, but the sadness in his eyes told me he didn't believe me. And yet, he said nothing more. That was the kind of man he was. He suffered in silence, even when he knew he was losing me. But if I thought guilt would be enough to stop me, I was wrong. The next time I saw Balthasar, I knew there was no turning back. We met in a dimly lit hotel room, as we always did. He stood by the window, looking out at the city, his posture tense. There was something different about him tonight, something guarded. I walked toward him, slipping my arms around his waist. What's wrong? He turned to face me, his dark eyes serious. We can't keep doing this. The words sliced through me. Why? Because it's dangerous. I frowned. Dangerous. What are you talking about? He hesitated before running a hand over his face. I need you to trust me. Trust. The word felt like a lie between us. We were built on secrecy, on stolen moments. And yet, in that moment, I realized something. I did trust him. More than I should. I reached up, brushing my fingers over his jaw. Then tell me the truth. He exhaled, his hands gripping my waist. There are people watching me. My job, it's not just numbers and reports. There are people who would use anything against me, including you. A chill ran down my spine. What do you mean? I mean someone knows about us. My heart pounded. Who? I don't know yet, he admitted. But I got a call. A warning. I should have been afraid. I was afraid. But more than that, I felt the weight of reality crashing down on me. Balthasar came to my home. It started subtly. A touch too long at church, a whispered word that lingered in my mind long after he had spoken it. Then it escalated. The first time Balthasar came to my house, my husband was away on a business trip, something that had become more frequent in recent months. I told myself it was just a conversation, that I wasn't really opening the door to my marriage and letting another man walk in. But when I let Balthasar inside, when I locked the door behind him, something inside me knew there was no turning back. He moved through my home like he belonged there, his eyes trailing over the pictures on the walls, the small details of my life with my husband. And yet, he didn't hesitate. He turned to me, his hands settling on my waist, pulling me against him. "Do you want me to leave?" he asked, his voice low, teasing. I should have said yes. I should have stepped back, should have ended it there before we ruined everything. Instead, I whispered, "No." He kissed me, and I melted. Right there in the hallway, pressed against the very walls that had witnessed years of my marriage. His hands explored my body as if he had every right to, as if I belonged to him. And in that moment, I did. That was the first time. But it wasn't the last. After that, we grew reckless. My husband's routine became something I memorized, calculating the hours he would be gone, the moments I could steal. Balthasar would come in through the back door, his presence filling the spaces where my husband had faded. We would make love in the very bed I once shared with my husband, tangled in sheets that still smelled like a life I was betraying. There was something intoxicating about the danger of it. Knowing that at any moment, a car could pull into the driveway, a key could turn in the lock. But that risk only fueled the passion, made it more desperate, more consuming. And yet, the deeper we sank into our affair, the heavier the guilt became. Some nights, after he left, I would lie beside my husband, staring at the ceiling, wondering if he could smell another man on my skin. But he never said anything. And so, I kept letting Balthasar in. Kept pretending that I wasn't playing with fire. Until the night everything changed. It was supposed to be just another night. Another stolen moment. Another lie. By then, Balthasar and I had grown comfortable in our deception. He still came to my house when my husband was away, but there was something about having him in my space that made the affair feel too real. Too dangerous. So when he first suggested I come to his place instead, it felt like a relief. His home was nothing like mine. Where my house was warm, filled with soft colors and framed memories, his was sleek, modern, and impersonal. It was the kind of place where a man lived alone, not necessarily because he wanted to, but because his life didn't allow for anything permanent. The first time I stepped inside, I felt a strange sense of guilt. My husband's face lingered in my mind, the quiet sadness in his eyes that I had ignored for so long. But when Balthasar pulled me into him, his hands firm and certain, the guilt disappeared. At his home, I wasn't a wife. I wasn't someone sneaking around, terrified of getting caught. I was just his. And that's how it continued. Our nights at the hotel became nights at his place. I would tell my husband I had a church gathering, a dinner with friends, anything to buy me the hours I needed. At first, I was careful, only staying for a short while, making sure to return home before it got too late. But then, one night, I stayed until dawn. Balthasar had been different that evening, quieter, distracted. He had poured himself a drink before kissing me, something he never did. "Something's wrong," I murmured against his lips. He pulled back slightly, his dark eye searching mine. "Nothing I can't handle." I frowned. "That's not an answer." He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. There's something I haven't told you. A cold weight settled in my stomach. What? He hesitated. And that's when I knew. I stepped back, suddenly unsure of the space between us. Balthasar, what is this? Who are you, really? For the first time since we met, I saw hesitation in his eyes. You know who I am. I shook my head. No. I know what you told me. But there's something else. Something I've been ignoring because I didn't want to see it. He didn't answer. He just stared at me. And then, his phone buzzed on the table. I turned my head instinctively, and that's when I saw it, an encrypted message flashing on the screen. I didn't catch the words, but I saw enough. My heart started pounding. Who's that? Balthasar grabbed the phone before I could see more. His jaw tightened. You need to leave. My stomach dropped. What? He was already walking toward the door. Now. Go home. Don't call me. I had never seen him like this. Balthasar, who was always in control, always composed. This was something else. Something dangerous. I didn't move. Tell me what's going on. His hands clenched into fists. It's not safe for you to be here. Panic clawed at my chest. Balthasar. A loud bang echoed from outside. The door swung open so forcefully that it crashed against the wall. My breath caught in my throat as a woman stepped inside, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. She was beautiful, tall, elegant, with sharp cheekbones and dark eyes that burned with fury. A woman who belonged in this house far more than I ever could. Balthasar's wife. My stomach twisted as she took in the scene, me, standing frozen in the middle of her home, my clothes slightly rumpled, my hair still tangled from his touch. And Balthasar, standing between us like a man who had just realized there was no escape. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then she laughed low, bitter, and full of something that sent a chill through my body. Well, she said, tilting her head. I thought something was going on. But I never imagined you'd be stupid enough to bring her here. My heart pounded. I turned to Balthasar, but he wasn't looking at me. His face was unreadable, his body tense. She stepped forward, her heels clicking against the floor. Tell me, who is she? She turned to me, her gaze like a blade. Who are you to my husband? My throat was dry. Balthasar cut in. This isn't what it looks like. His wife's eyes flashed with something dangerous. Oh, please. She turned back to me. You're sleeping with him, aren't you? I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. What was I supposed to say? She let out another bitter laugh, crossing her arms. Of course you are. Do you think you're the first? Do you think you're special? Something inside me twisted. Balthasar finally spoke. That's enough. His voice was quiet but firm. His wife turned on him, her fury now directed at him. No, you have had enough, Balthasar. Enough lies. Enough running around. And now, you're reckless enough to bring her here? She scoffed. Who is she, another pathetic little church woman who thought you'd leave me for her? My face burned with humiliation. I had imagined many ways this affair could go wrong, but this being caught like this, being reduced to this was worse than anything I had prepared for. Balthasar reached for her arm, but she yanked away. Don't touch me, she spat. Silence stretched between them. Then, without another word, she turned and walked toward the door. But before she left, she paused, looking back at me. Take a good look at him, she said, her voice cold. Because he's never yours. And he never will be. And with that, she was gone. The door slammed behind her, and the weight of what had just happened crashed down on me. I turned to Baltasar, my chest heaving. You said you were divorced. His jaw tightened. It's complicated. I laughed, but it came out broken. Complicated? My voice shook. She just walked into her house and found me here. Complicated doesn't even begin to describe it. He stepped closer, but I backed away. I need to go. Wait. No, I whispered. I can't do this. And before he could stop me, I ran out the door. But even as I fled, I knew the damage was already done. My secret was out. And sooner or later, my husband would find out, too. I barely slept that night. The weight of what had happened pressed against my chest, making it hard to breathe. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her Baltasar's wife standing in that doorway, her voice laced with venom. Do you think you're special? I wasn't. And now I was certain she wouldn't let me walk away from this so easily. The next morning, my worst fear came true. I was in the kitchen, pretending to make breakfast, my hands trembling as I buttered toast. My husband sat at the table, scrolling through his phone, oblivious to the storm that was about to hit. Then his phone buzzed. A message. I didn't have to see it to know who it was from. I watched as he read it, his brow furrowing slightly. Then his entire body stiffened. His hand clenched around the phone. He looked up at me, and in that moment, I knew. Carla, he said, his voice eerily calm. Is there something you want to tell me? I swallowed hard. What do you mean? He turned the phone toward me. A message from an unknown number. But the words were unmistakable. Your wife is sleeping with my husband. My stomach dropped. There was an image attached, a blurry photo, but clear enough. Me standing in his house. I felt like I was going to be sick. My husband set the phone down, his fingers drumming against the table. I'll ask you again, he said, his voice tight. Is there something you need to tell me? I opened my mouth, but no words came. Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Then he laughed, low and bitter. So it's true. Let me explain, I whispered. He slammed his hand against the table, making me jump. Explain what, Carla? That you've been screwing another man behind my back. That you've been lying to my face every single day. Tears burned my eyes. I didn't mean for it to happen. His eyes flashed with something raw. Pain. But it did. I wiped at my face, my whole body trembling. I never wanted to hurt you. Then why did you? His voice cracked. I had no answer. He pushed back from the table, standing up so abruptly that the chair scraped against the floor. How long? What? His jaw clenched. How long? I looked down. A few months. He scoffed. Months. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing the kitchen like a man trying to hold himself together. And all this time, I thought something was wrong with me. I thought maybe I wasn't enough for you anymore. And the whole time, you were in his bed. I choked back a sob. It wasn't just about that. He turned to me, his eyes dark. Then what was it about? I didn't know what to say. Because how do you explain something that even you don't fully understand? He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. I can't do this. He grabbed his keys and walked out the door. And just like that, my world fell apart.